on a dreary night of November.
Welcome to Sundays with Frankenstein. I afterwards found that these labors, performed by an invisible hand, greatly astonished them, and once or twice I heard them on these occasions utter the words, "Good spirit, wonderful," but I did not then understand the signification of these terms. Good spirits, this is episode 7 of Sundays with Frankenstein. We will be covering volume 2, chapters 3 and 4 of the 1818 edition today. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia. And joining me today is 19th century science fiction scholar and scholar of all hats, really. I mean, she knows so much. Dr. Anastasia Klimchinskaya. Anastasia, welcome back.
Hi, Ed. Pleasure to be here as always. I can't believe we're in episode 7 already.
We are, and this is actually your second time on, right? Which shocked me because I'm thinking like I talk to you frequently enough, and I'm thinking like, whoa, this is we've only done 2 of these. I feel like you've been in it from the beginning because we talk about it a lot. So
yeah, well, the schedule is a little strange. I'll be back again on the 21st, which is 2 weeks from now. So you'll be seeing more of me, hopefully.
Yeah, well, we switch around the schedule a little bit now. So just before we started, or just as the credits started to roll, I think what I heard from downstairs was somebody yelling, it's starting. And they were all running to watch it because my wife and 2 girls at home watch this now. So that was really cute to hear. So
yeah, well, my parents are actually in the other room. They're behind this wall, and they actually ordered a Sundays with Frankenstein t-shirt, which just arrived yesterday. So we're all very excited about that.
Awesome. Did you get yours yet?
I got it, but it's in Chicago and I'm currently in Michigan. So it's waiting for me securely.
Good. Well, yes. So it is. I'll talk about, well, you know, we have merch, everybody. We have Sundays of Frankenstein merchandise, and with all our cartoonized faces on it. And let me share where you guys can order that from. You can go to our website, and if you go here to programs, if you go to Sundays with Frankenstein, look, there's a Sundays with Frankenstein merchandise tab. And if you click on that, you can click here to start shopping. You can order, you can pre-order, and here's how it works now. Pre-order these great glasses, and I have mine right here, the t-shirts and stickers. Now I say to pre-order because we ran out of them right away. As soon as we put them on sale, we ran out. So we are ordering more, but what we're doing is we're taking pre-orders first, and then we're going to put a big order in. So, and we're not going to keep a lot of back stock because we're a small institution. We can't afford to, you know, put this money out there and invest it in things that are just going to sit for a while. So if you want to guarantee getting a t-shirt or a glass, the stickers you should be fine on. But if you want to guarantee getting a t-shirt or a glass, I would suggest you pre-order them, and you pre-order today or tomorrow. I'm pretty certain the order is going to be placed on tomorrow or early Tuesday morning. So get your pre-orders in for Sundays with Sundays with Frankenstein merchandise. That's, I guess, what it is. It's Frankendice. That's what this stuff is. So, and you've got your little picture on here. Anastasia, do you like that, having a cartoon version of yourself out there on a shirt?
I do love it, though. I got a haircut, so I don't quite resemble my cartoon illustration anymore. I don't have pandemic hair anymore.
Well, as I've said, my hair is like, I have a lot more hair in my picture than I have in real life. And I didn't ask for that, everybody. So I'm totally fine going bald. So,
you know, my parents didn't realize that was me in the picture. I think they're used to me having short hair. I had to explain to them that's
look, that's me. No, it's not. No, it is really.
That's Ed, and that's the other hosts.
Good. All righty, everyone. So you can order your Frankenstein merch, your Sundays with Frankenstein merchandise. A reminder to people in the chat here on Zoom right now, please set your chat to panelists and all attendees, otherwise no one's seeing. I saw there were a few people that didn't have their chat setting on Zoom to attendees as well. So then nobody is reading your chat because we don't do the chat. If you have a question during the show, please put it in the Q&A and we will answer as many questions as we can during the show. But put your questions in the Q&A. Are you drinking anything delicious today?
I'm sorry to say that I'm not, but I will have my Frankenstein glass next time, and maybe I'll come up with some green concoction to put in it.
Please do. It strikes me that I always ask you guys this question. I ask it to showcase when I'm drinking, obviously, but it strikes me that I drink a lot more than the rest of my co-hosts do. So,
well, I discovered that Art in the Age does not ship outside of Pennsylvania, and it broke my heart.
It's very difficult. Yes. I mean, it's all these crazy, laws about alcohol and what state boundaries it can cross and where it can. So, we'll have to make sure we get you something. But today I am drinking one of my favorites, and that is this Tamworth Garden Damson Plum Gin, which I really love. We featured this in a drink earlier in the season, and they wanted to go back to it again. And I said, but I drank the rest of that bottle. So I had to go get another bottle this week in order to do this drink. And last week's drink was called The Wandering Spirit. And today's drink is called, and it was for Victor and the creature. And today's drink is called The Good Spirit, just for the creature. Because this is the two chapters, especially the one chapter where he really gets, he's happiest in this, one chapter we're covering today. Maybe the next one too, next week. Than he will be for the rest of his existence. And the Good Spirit is Damson Plum Gin, and it is this Somme Thai Basil cordial. It's a vinegar cordial, and then it's topped off with Topo Chico mineral water from Mexico. So it's fancier than I usually drink, I think. And I topped it with some little some little dried flowers as a garnish. So give it a little fragrance as I'm drinking it. On the rocks, excellent drink. Steve from the Rosenbach is our chat Igor today. He'll be putting that recipe in the chat. We'll also feature it on our website. And something I should make you guys know about too, and thanks so much to Tamworth Distilling and Art in the Age for coming up with these yummy concoctions, but they're also helping support the Rosenbach as well, not just by sponsoring drinks for the show, but if you go to the Art in the Age website where they have the drink kit, where you could buy these 3 ingredients and buy the drink kit if you're in the right area where they can ship to. I'm sorry, Anastasia, but you could do this anyway. On their website, they have, and I'll share this page with you to show you too, where the drink kit is that you can purchase. Here it is, Sundays of Frankenstein, Tamworth Garden Damson. And this changes every week. It's always the same link. It's Shop Art in the Age, products, Sundays of Frankenstein. The link's available in our Facebook group, and we put it in the chat here. When you go here, look what they have here. They have a little box for the Rosenbach too. The Rosenbach works to foster inquiry, learning, and creative thought in the community. So you can donate to the Rosenbach right on this page as well. $1, $3, $5, any amount helps. It's really great that they help support us by featuring this on their page as well. So thanks, Tamworth. Thanks, Art in the Age. And thank you all who help support the show. Because we're not just drinking here today, right? We're also talking about Frankenstein. And what we do every week is dissect, anatomize, dismember, and bring back to life this book by Mary Shelley, 2 chapters at a time, usually chapter by chapter, page by page, word by word, as we create our very own conversational annotation of the entire novel. And in doing this, we ask you at the Rosenbach to help support us, which you can do by donation. You can become a member. You can go to the webpage at Art in the Age and donate some money through there. That's really great. I'll have more to say at the mid-break about how to support us as well. And that's all the preliminaries. Let's get into talking about this book. Last chapter ended with the creature and Victor. They finally met in the icy, in the sea of ice, the mer de glace, and then the creature takes Victor off to his hut in the mountains, and they're seated by the fire, and the creature begins to tell his tale, and it is Oh, and that's how it is. It starts. It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of being, era, A-E-R-A, that his original coming into being, coming into consciousness. He says it was confused and indistinct. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time. Very interesting the way Shelley, I think, imagines not even just what it's like to come into existence, even as maybe like a baby, but almost as an adult, like someone, like it seems as if he understands. Well, I mean, he's recounting this 2 years after the fact, but it's, you know, this is a different kind of creation, a being who is fully formed as an adult to come into awareness, um, and it happens all at once, right, Anastasia?
Yeah, well, so there's a few interesting things there. First, to just step back a little bit really quickly, and to remind us all about the kind of nested narratives of Frankenstein. So here we have a narrative within a narrative within a narrative. There's a French word for it. It's called a mise en abîme. It's, you know, kind of, if you've ever seen a painting where something kind of repeats into infinity. So, you know, first you have kind of Walton's frame and his letters. Then you have Frankenstein telling his story to Walton. And then you have the creature telling his story to Frankenstein. So first of all, this is, you know, the creature story is twice removed from the reader. This is Walton's recounting of Frankenstein's recounting of what the creature said. But also, if you look at the way that the nested narratives work, the creature's story is the very heart of the book. It's kind of, you know, the very middle of the book. It's it starts in the middle of volume 2. So, you know, if you want to think about kind of the positioning and the framing, it's interesting to think about, you know, what does it mean that the creature and the creature's story is kind of literally the core, the heart of the book. So that's my first thought. Another one.
Although let me follow up on that too, because we won't hit this now because we're not going to hit it till next week. But the DeLacy family, and then they have a visitor, and they bring in Safie into their family. And one of the things that I find fascinating is we actually get Safie's story winds up being the very center of the novel, and then it goes back again because the creature's describing the DeLacy family, and we get some of their history. So we get the story of the DeLacys, and then we get the story of Safie. And then we're back to the DeLacys and the creature and Victor and Walton at the end. So I always find it odd that I don't find it odd, but it is fascinating that Mary Shelley has put this, you know, woman's story, this young woman, Safie, and her adventures at the very heart of, like, the very set, and it's almost in the exact middle too, page count wise as well. So there'll be more of that coming. But thanks for reminding us of this nesting that's been going on and how it all gets layered, and also the back and forth between, and also the kind of, it's not right at the moment. It's stories that are also told recollected from years before. So, which happened.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's the creature reflecting on and introspecting on his experiences, which I think I'll get into a little bit later in the show when he talks a little more about his experiences, and that's where, you know, I'll talk a little more about the significance of that introspection. But just, you're right, the way that she kind of describes the creature opening its eyes or opening his eyes, and you know, being inundated by all these sense impressions. And to me, that's, you know, very interesting in terms of all of this kind of political philosophy and writing on education that would have been happening during the Enlightenment. So people like, you know, John Locke, Rousseau, wondering, you know, are humans born as kind of a blank slate that, you know, things are then written into? You've probably heard the term blank slate, tabula rasa, or are we born, you know, as Hobbes said, with like a predisposition to selfishness and evil? And so it's almost like Mary Shelley is kind of working out this thought experiment based on, you know, things she's read by Rousseau, by probably her father, William Godwin, who also wrote on education. She's working this thought experiment of, you know, here's this creature that comes into being, but he's not a baby. He's like a full-grown man. And, you know, he comes into existence with all of his senses fully developed. He doesn't kind of have to grow and develop his eyes and his ears and whatnot. And, you know, does he have all of these preconceptions and predispositions? Can he tell apart what his different senses are? You know, where do his kind of conceptions and frameworks for understanding the world come from? Are they innate, or do they then come on, or are they kind of written on that slate from without? And it seems that she's saying that, you know, for the most part, there is not necessarily a blankness, but at the very least a predisposition towards goodness that is then kind of, you know, changed and transformed by his experiences in the world.
Good. All righty. Hold that thought 1 second. I've got a cat.
Is that? Oh, do we get to? Oh, I saw a tail.
She's already going off to her chair. That's Jane Paulston. And she was usually if I ignore her, she'll go away. She wasn't going away. I don't even know if people could hear the meowing, but she was meowing and scratching for about 5 minutes.
I could not hear the meowing, and I love everything about Sundays with Frankenstein, but it's a crime that we have not seen your cat.
We saw her in Dracula, but we haven't brought her out here for. If she comes out, I'll pick her up. So
I just saw a little bit of a tail.
Yeah. So she just wants to come in here and sleep. So that's what she's doing. Everybody else is busy watching a show downstairs. She likes to cuddle up with people during the day. So, or sleep in the same room as people is usually what it is. But this creature, the creature becoming aware of things. I love it's the way she describes it, the stronger light pressed upon my nerves and I was obliged to shut my eyes, and then darkness. And then I opened them again and it was light, and this like little bits of learning right away. There's also a little clue in here to him leaving the laboratory. He says, I walked and I believe descended, but I presently found a great alteration in my senses. Actually, what he's done is he's left the laboratory at that moment because it is on the top floor of this house that Victor has. That's where the laboratory is. So the descended there is him leaving. And then as he goes out, he's able to at first there's things in his way, it seems, and then he's able to wander on at liberty. So he was in the town and then he leaves the town and then goes off into the forest. But it's all this sensory perception that goes on, especially, well, we'll get to that in a little bit, but first that he describes, he's out in the forest. It was dark when I awoke, and it is his kind of first impressions of himself or of his condition is that he's half frightened, as it were, instinctively finding myself so desolate. I was a poor, helpless, miserable wretch. I knew and could distinguish nothing, but feeling pain invade me on all sides. I sat down and wept. It's that I hear the Shakespeare sonnet, when in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state. I mean, immediately he's in this desolate position. It's like he says the word instinctively, and it's like he instinctively understands this desolate condition. He instinctively understands that he has been abandoned, that his creator has already fled from him, although he doesn't seem to have a memory of that. Yet it's, why else would he be so desolate right off the start?
Mm-hmm. Well, and, you know, again, I'm always very wary of projecting too much of what an author might have been thinking or intending onto a text, because, you know, there's no way we can ever know. But, you know, I am, you know, curious to what extent Mary Shelley is projecting some of her own personal experiences. You know, firstly, she had eloped with Percy Shelley, which of course would have made her in some sense an outcast. You know, a respectable young woman was not supposed to run off to the continent with a married man. there was the, rather complicated situation with her father, who had remarried after her mother's death, and her relations with that family were not, complicated at best. So you have to wonder if maybe she felt like an outsider in that way. So I think in all of these ways, Mary Shelley is reflecting on what it means to be kind of other, even though, of course, in a lot of ways, she also was writing from and experienced quite a bit of privilege. But it seems to me that, some aspect of being other and of her complicated life situation is making its way into the creature's kind of desolation and as you said, outcast state.
And subconsciously, this can go back to her own birth as well. I mean, she's born and several days later, her mother dies. And
exactly.
She has to grow up with that idea that the mother, her creator, has left her, and always has that, burden in her life. I mean, she's written about it too. And there's, it's this novel and even other novels she writes about this kind of abandonment of children and how they have to cope with that, how people have to cope with that. So.
Well, and also we talked, or you talked with one of the co-hosts last time, I think, about, Percy and his abandonment of his wife and his child, and the way that, Mary Shelley very much seems to be critiquing Percy and a lot of the romantic mindset that he represents in the novel. So one might wonder if there's also that kind of subtle and almost underhanded criticism of, the man who would be her husband, Percy Shelley, in the way that, he just kind of ran off and abandoned his family to be with Mary. And that kind of, I always imagined that she had very complicated feelings about, the fact that he left one wife to essentially elope with her.
Yeah. The, back to the creature, he has all these, he talks about he sees this light and it gives him a sensation of, and this is the moon, and he sees the moon, and the moon kind of lights his way a little bit at night. And then he talks about, I felt light and hunger and thirst and darkness, innumerable sounds ring my ears. Again, as you were mentioning before, all this kind of sensory perception that happens, and what is the condition of the mind? How does it form these things? Well, first from senses, can I throw Humphrey Davy in here? A line from...
Please do.
I know that's favorite. A line from the discourse. Man, in what is called a state of nature, is a creature of almost pure sensation. And Mary's very influenced by Humphrey Davy, right?
Yeah. She was reading him while she was composing Frankenstein.
Reading his discourse, and there's a lot of the chemical, and because it's a discourse really on chemistry in a sense, right? But he's a natural philosopher kind of scientist, and he's writing about existence, and she is reading that, and there are innumerable places in this novel where you can find the influence of Humphrey Davy on this text, and even earlier on with all the alchemist stuff, because Davy mentions those things, and but here that idea that people are creatures of almost pure sensation, and this seems to be what she's describing is going on with him, and these senses, these initial senses that hit him, and they sharpen over time. He talks about how things are sharpening and how he understands things more as he's experiencing them. And then he hears the birds and he tries to imitate them, but his own sounds are uncouth and inarticulate. I love that he's trying to imitate nature, and we're imitative creatures and we know that, but it's nature that he turns to because that's where he's thrust out upon. And, but he also fails. He can't, I'm not that thing. And the question I had is that, does that beg the question because he's monstrous, he can't quite do that? Or is it just more even basic than that? He's human, so he can't quite be like the birds in the woods. Because there's this whole noble savage idea that comes from Rousseau, that I wonder if she's kind of pushing against that in effect, that he's not quite, he doesn't quite naturally fit into this landscape.
So I was actually, when I was preparing for this, I started reading up on the noble savage to refresh my memory, and it turns out that the idea does not actually come from Rousseau, although it has been misattributed to him. But no, what I find it really interesting about that
Rousseau does write about it, though, right? I mean, he does. This is part of him, but he just doesn't come up with it, or
I think the kind of the term originally comes from this English philosopher named the Earl of Shaftesbury, I believe, who was writing in the late 17th century, so around the same time as John Locke. But then the idea takes off and obviously becomes a trope, and especially in the 19th century, it becomes a huge trope with, the expansion of Western settlers, European settlers in the, to the west of the US. And they have all of these preconceptions about the noble savage that they apply to many of the indigenous peoples that they see. So it's an idea that's really kind of very much in the air and very popular. But in terms of the creature and his attempts to imitate the birds, it's interesting because he starts by trying to imitate the birds and he can't, but he only tries once. And then later on, he attempts to imitate the language that the de Lacys are speaking, which, as far as we know, is French, which, I think if you're just going to learn a language off the bat, if you don't speak any languages at all, French pronunciation will throw you for a loop. But that's interesting to me because, especially I think in 18th, 19th century Enlightenment thought, language would have been considered one of the things that makes us human. It's the thing that differentiates us from animals. So for whatever reason, he cannot imitate the song of the birds, maybe because, he just didn't try hard enough or long enough, because, it takes him a while to learn language.
Tarzan could. Tarzan, like, immediately, he's picking up these animal sounds as he's growing up.
Or Dr. Dolittle, he spoke like 500 animal languages. But no, I think it's very significant that the creature is able to learn language, and the creature is able to learn human language, because again,
we get the language. I don't want to jump our gun with the language, because that clearly comes into play later.
Sorry,
that's okay, because put a pin in that, because we're really going to hit the language and there's so much in this that's fascinating about the way she approaches the creature learning language.
Okay, well, in that case, one more thing, just really quickly, about the creature feeling hunger and thirst and all of these kind of physical needs, which is very interesting because just a chapter ago, we have Victor. Do you remember, that part of chapter 2 where Victor is talking about how he's so miserable because he's feeling all of these emotions, and he says, "Alas, why does man boast of sensibilities superior to those apparent in the brute, and only renders them more necessary beings? If our impulses were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire, we might be nearly free. But now we are moved by every wind that blows, and a chance word or scene that word may convey to us." So Victor's here kind of like, well, if only all we felt was hunger and thirst and the need to sleep, we would be free, but we have all of these emotions, which is such a juxtaposition to the creature, who I don't think would agree with that. He's feeling plenty of hunger and thirst and cold and misery, and I don't think he would feel particularly freed by only feeling those things and nothing else. So already we see a very sharp contrast between Victor's outlook on the world and the creature's outlook on the world, and even their conceptions of free will, of what it means to exist as a being in the world.
Absolutely. Adrian mentions in the Q&A comment that the idea of a newborn discovering the world in the creature's first days, and also it's like, that's it right there. Like, we've just done the infant stuff, like that is, and now he's moving forward, already, and that the creature growing up is this condensed period where your first couple weeks or whatever are akin to being a newborn, now he'll go into this experiential, things and learning things that you would do, as a child. Christine has an interesting question here, and I wonder if we hit this sometime today, because I don't have a quick answer for it, because it's, did readers at the time question the creature's acknowledgement of emotions and values? And I want to put a pin in that and keep that in mind for later when he first encounters the DeLacy's, when we talk about emotions and values. Okay, so let me hold that one right.
Yeah. Well, I will talk a little later about the creature feeling emotions and sympathy in terms of theories of sentimental culture in the 18th century. I think that would be best when we reach that part. But in terms of what readers at the time thought, for that, we would have to go look at what people were writing in response at the time. So reviews that were being published in periodicals of the novel, and maybe people, I think this was before the advent of letters pages in newspapers, where people would just kind of write to the newspaper and say, here's what I thought of this thing that was just published. But maybe in correspondence of the time, in journals and diaries, maybe we can find that kind of.
It may be something I need to research further, at least look in reviews too, because there's several reviews of this book that may mention those kinds of things, and I don't have them off the top of my head right now. But in the story now, in this chapter, that now he's going into this experiential phase, and he's observing and learning, and then he finds a fire that some wandering beggars have left, and he thrusts his hand into it and immediately draws it out a cry of pain, because, as we all know, fire bad, which actually doesn't occur in a Frankenstein film, but actually it's always parodied as that way, fire bad. But that's what he discovers right here. And but also it has the opposite effects, and he says, I examine in that it's warm and provides light. And he says, I examine the materials, the wood that's burning. He collected some. He says, I'm watching the operation of the fire. I reflected on this. I discovered the cause. I mean, the vocabulary choices here are all this, how a human learns through not just experience, but experimenting. He's observing and experimenting and figuring out how to create this fire. Some of the wood is too wet, and he realizes that if it's close to the fire, that'll burn and all. And even though he is just a child, in a sense that he's just been born, it's that you get the impression that it is this accelerated, learning process that he goes through. Which maybe absolutely. Explain later how he can pick up language so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, he basically, as you say, figures out the scientific method in, a few hours. It took humanity a few thousand years to kind of reach the scientific method in its present state, with experimentation as the way that we produce knowledge. But yeah, the creature got it in a couple hours. But also the fact that it's fire is so significant, because, fire is so symbolic. If you think about the myth of Prometheus, not the myth that the subtitle of this novel is referencing, the one where Prometheus creates man from clay, but there's another version of the myth of Prometheus, where he steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans. And the reason this is significant, and it will be significant at the end of the novel, as you'll see, is that fire and light is often a metaphor for knowledge. That's why we say, we illuminate something or we elucidate something. The etymology of both of those words is the word for light in
elucidate,
various...
brighten, loose,
Yeah, exactly.
Lucifer, the bright one. There we go.
Yeah, Lucifer literally means bearer of light. It's the same root. It's the Latin word lux, which means light. So it's in this creature, we have not just the development of, an individual being, but it almost reads as a metaphor for the development of humanity more broadly, as kind of, humanity coming into the world. And, one of the first things we must have figured out, or our ancestors figured out to survive, is fire in order to create light, in order to create heat, in order to cook food, maybe even in order to communicate with each other through fire and smoke. So it's the creature discovering some fundamental part of being human, some fundamental part of the kind of development that humanity itself went through to become what we are today.
And it's and she has the creature do this immediately. This is his first real experience with the world, is to advance his own, ability, the ability to function in the world. It's fire that he first deals with, that she puts in there. I also want to throw a little of Volney in here as well. Volney's Ruins of Empire. And I say this because this is a good spot to throw it in, because this is one of this is the text that next week in chapters 5 and 6, where Felix and Safie will be reading this book out loud. And I think, are they using Volney to teach Safie, and or are they just reading to each other? In any case, the creature overhears them reading this book, Ruins of Empire. And it is in that Volney writes about the primitive state of man. Formed naked in body and in mind, man at first found himself thrown, as it were, by chance on a rough and savage land, an orphan abandoned by the unknown power which had produced him. Like, did Mary Shelley write that? Like, I mean, if I read that passage to So Strange, you would think, like, is that from the novel? No, this is Volney writing. He saw not by his side beings descended from heaven to warn him of those wants which arise only from his senses, nor to instruct him in those duties which spring only from his wants. Like to other animals, without experience of the past, without foresight of the future, he wandered in the bosom of the forest, guided only and governed by the affections of his nature. By the pain of hunger, he was led to seek food and provide for his subsistence. By the inclemency of the air, he was urged to cover his body, and he made him clothes. By the attraction of a powerful pleasure, he approached a being like himself, and he perpetuated his kind. Thus, the impressions which he received from every object, awakening his faculties, developed by degrees his understanding, and began to instruct his profound ignorance. It's not so much that Mary Shelley is taking these ideas from people and using them to, for her own purposes. I think it just demonstrates that she's very keyed into the way people are writing about how humans come to have knowledge and function and develop civilization and develop relationships with each other. That it's very much on her mind, and she puts this Volney Ruins of Empire, but she puts it in the book too in the next couple chapters. But that passage there just describes the creature's condition himself at this point.
I mean, that's the legacy of the Enlightenment. If I'm going to paint in broad strokes here, so much of the Enlightenment is about attempting to theorize about human nature and how human nature develops, and then from that to theorize how we can construct society in an equitable and fair way that takes into account human nature and the way that the human self is constituted and the way that we realize our fellow beings. Again, this is what Rousseau and John Locke and Hobbes and Voltaire and all of these people are writing about. And Mary Shelley, as an incredibly educated child of the Enlightenment, as a child of two parents who were very much engaged with Enlightenment philosophy, who were writing it, who were reading it, she is the daughter of this incredibly rich philosophical legacy that she is wrestling with and responding to, and attempting to kind of almost intervene in philosophically herself to respond to all this thought, except that she's not doing it as a treatise or a discourse or a piece of nonfiction. She's doing it as a novel, and in that sense as a thought experiment.
And their family.
Think about
and their family too. God, when he's running a children's bookstore, and they're writing stories to with a pedagogical, emphasis that they're instructing children, and Mary herself even contributes to that as a teenager. I think she writes 1 or 2 books for him or translates something, old stories for children to learn from. So this whole endeavor is, she's been involved with this as a child, seeing this way of reading books to instruct you to be, better.
Yeah, which, not to spoil
Perfect you.
anything, but in that sense, I think it's telling how much the creature learns from reading.
Well, right now he finds a small hut and it's abandoned. Oh no, he finds a small hut and he examines it. I examine the structure with great curiosity. And then he goes in and there's an old man in there who just screams and runs away in a very almost Python-esque moment. But then once it's happened, it's like, oh, that's so tragic. This is the first person he remembers encountering. He is, of course, seen his creator as he's wandered out of town. He must have, at least seen people as he's wandering out, and people were probably steering clear of this 8-foot tall, naked but wearing a coat person wandering out of town, monstrous looking, the way we know that he appears. But he encounters this man and he runs away. And then he has this great line. We get a Milton reference, so we're definitely going to talk about it. The hut, it presented to me then as exquisite and divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire. And before we get to that, we also mentioned he finds food there that this man leaves: bread, cheese, milk, and wine. The latter, however, I did not like. So didn't like the wine. That doesn't surprise me. So
yeah, sorry, Ed, I don't think the creature and you would get along on the drinking front.
He's also a vegetarian, so yeah. So as Percy was, but I don't know if Mary was, or at least may have. I don't think she ever really writes about being a vegetarian, but we know Percy was. So Percy just lived on berries in the woods. He didn't want to eat anything besides that. So,
oh boy.
But they did drink. So, but there we go.
I'm sure wine is all the nutrients you need.
What about this Paradise Lost reference? Tell people why there's a Paradise Lost.
Yeah,
reference.
So obviously Paradise Lost is kind of one of the key texts running through Frankenstein. It's obviously on the title page. There's
and will be a book he reads himself.
Yeah, he's already mentioned, I would be thy Adam, but Pandemonium is the palace, the palace of Satan and the fallen angels in hell. Pandemonium is Greek. It literally means all demons. And so if you read Paradise Lost, the angels and Satan are cast out of hell for rebelling against God. And that's what the book opens with. And so they find themselves kind of in this lake of fire in hell. And they say, let's build this castle that will rival in splendor that of God up in heaven. So, and they say, the mind is its own place. It can make a hell of heaven, a heaven of hell. It's so this idea that they can replicate heaven in hell. All they have to do is, equal it in splendor, equal it in effort, and put their minds to it. And they can transform hell into heaven. They don't need to actually be in heaven in the presence of God. Of course, that's a deep and gross misunderstanding of kind of an ontological misunderstanding of the nature of the world and creation, but that is kind of the conceit of the angels.
And Milton coins that term, right? He creates that term. Yeah. Well, it's out of Latin, but it's Greek words Latinized that he creates that word pandemonium.
Yeah. So he coins that word, and so we have here the sentence. He's talking about this little hut, and it presented to me as exquisite and divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire, which again is interesting. I think maybe Shelley is misremembering Paradise Lost, because they don't fall to hell and then just find pandemonium, standing there for their convenience. That would kind of defeat the point of them being punished and cast out. It is something that they build in hell as kind of a monument to their continued insubordination and their continued rebellion in the attempt to make hell equal heaven instead of accepting their punishment. So, you know, the fact that the creature calls, you know, likens his little hut, his little retreat to this kind of almost blasphemous structure that the angels have constructed in hell after their fall is certainly a very intriguing choice. I don't know if I have an interpretation of it, but I think that that's you know, a metaphor to think about.
And several times he notes, you know, once we get to the DeLacy's too, how, you know, these things, he understands that these structures are of poor condition, and but they are a palace to him. And unlike what's going on in Pandemonium, in that, but it's the condition of the demons in hell, and how this is all that they have. This is certainly something that is going to come to, you know, embody his thinking, that he wants to be the Adam, but he recognizes that he's more the fallen angel, and this is his condition. And it's from the very start here. At least, I mean, it's a retrospective reference because he hasn't read Paradise Lost yet when he comes across this hut, so he doesn't do it then. But even thinking about his life in, you know, in telling the story, it is Paradise Lost has come to infuse his experience in life. The after the hut, he then, you know, he leaves and he finds a village. And I had hardly placed my foot within the door in this one house that he sees there before the children shrieked and one of the women fainted. Some fled, some attacked me until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons. I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel. So, you know, the first person runs away from him. He encounters a whole village of people and they scream and faint and then attack him and drive him away. These are his first experiences.
Yeah.
It is no wonder he feels like the fallen angel in Paradise Lost, that this is, you know, the condition that he immediately meets with. And when this low hovel that he you know takes cover in is actually this little shed kind of connected to the DeLacy cottage, and we don't know their names DeLacy yet, I think, in this passage, in these chapters. So I think we find that out in the next. I find that so weird that he's just like living in this cottage and in this little like hovel that is literally attached to their house for months and they don't notice. It reminds me of all of those kind of crime stories you hear about a guy who's like living between the walls of your house and in your closets, and then he comes out and eats your food while you're asleep or at work and you don't notice for months and you're like, why am I out of milk again? Like, that's just, how creepy. Do they not know? And we deal with that in the sense that he even stops taking their food at one point, and but you know, you've got to suspend your, you know, disbelief here a little bit to think of how this would work in reality. It's interesting because there's other issues that I think in how he acquires language and learns how to read that somebody mentions in the Q&A. Laura mentions that could the creature have had memories from the brain that was put into his body, or was it more like a newborn's way of learning? Mary Shelley doesn't provide that answer, but it is a common reader observation to come up with that. And it's in movies as well, you know.
And yeah, it's in a lot of kind of pastiches and sequels and whatnot, where that idea is there, that there's, you know, something of the previous person. But, you know, you have to think about kind of the idea of where consciousness and you know, being comes from. And I guess kind of if you're working within a theological framework, then all of those parts of what make you, they don't come from the brain, they come from the soul. And of course, there is a question of does the creature have a soul? Was Victor able to give him a soul? The creature, I think,
Creature says he has a soul,
he
right
has
off the
well,
bat.
you know, how does he know? You know, is Mary Shelley implying that Victor was able to be the creator to, you know, in the kind of divine sense of the word, that he was able to grant the creature a soul just kind of accidentally, or is that kind of a slip on Mary Shelley's part as she was writing?
Well, David mentions that, or asks what might account for the lack of any memories or sensations from the creature's previously owned brain, and I think you've touched on it there, that the conception of the brain as the house of memories and personality and who you are isn't quite settled yet. That it's more of the idea of your soul contains who you are, not necessarily your brain.
Yeah, I mean, so there was some thought and some writing about this. You know, Descartes in his discourse on the method, he's very famous for mind-body dualism, but you know, he talks about kind of like the seat of the soul being in this gland in the back of your neck, and then you have this philosopher named Johann Lamettrie who wrote Man as Machine in the middle of the 18th century, which was a highly blasphemous text, because he essentially said, you know, man is just machine. All of our actions and thoughts and everything is mechanical. You know, you press a button or you press a lever, and something happens, and emotions and impressions are just kind of like, you know, pressing a button or a lever, and then, you know, results happen. So that's kind of there is some thought about that kind of where does the mind, consciousness, the soul, where, you know, how is that related to the physical body? But you're right that, you know, obviously that conception is not kind of developed in the same way that we talk today about the hard problem of how the mind emerges from the body. And of course, kind of in terms of religion and understand and belief in the soul, I think, of course, we're at a very different moment today than 200 years ago when Mary Shelley was writing.
A couple questions.
Close my curtains a little bit because I'm just flooded in sunlight here. So yeah,
it looks almost kind of misty there because of the way the sun's coming in, and that should be.
I can't. Okay.
Like you're the one smoking and filling the room up.
Yeah. Okay. So, yes, this is gonna have to. I'm gonna have to sit in semi-darkness here. The window's right here, and it's very sunny in Michigan right now.
Jody and Kristen have a couple questions here too, and Jody's was like,
Patrick says in the chat, never let a mist in through the window, and that's a wonderful Dracula reference. I had to point that out
as we did through Dracula. Yes, Dracula lesson, not a Frankenstein lesson. Jody says, perhaps like a baby in a womb that can hear its mother and others, the creature being created during that process could hear and learn from Victor. And Kristen says, do you think the creature is meant to be supernaturally intelligent, or is his rapid development a narrative device? And again, I think both of these questions are just, you know, suppositions that the reader can approach the text in a way, then use your own imagination in a sense. And it's, Shelley doesn't seem to address this. Like she doesn't, like, this isn't important to her. It doesn't matter that, you know, we think that maybe the creature beast is, you know, supernaturally intelligent and that's part of his condition, or how he becomes intelligent isn't memories or something that, you know, subliminally that happened. That what's important for her, it seems to me, is that he does learn like humans learn. It is just that he has begun as a fully formed person, and I think there is something about the soul here, and we'll see how that gets mentioned again later in this novel, as the creature already, you know, wants to be, and it's also it's the filter, because everything the creature is talking about is filtered through his reading of, just as Mary's life is filtered through the things that she has read as well. What we get is a narrative account from the creature, in which is filtered through Paradise Lost, and then it'll be the Sorrows of Young Werther and Plutarch. And these are the things that we know that he reads. And as she will reference these things in the text through the creature, that she's clearly has in mind that he's filtering his experience and his ideas of what his own humanity is through these texts. Like this is how he's learned about who we are and how we behave.
Well, and I also think that it functions as a metaphorical level, or at least, that's my reading. That's, I think, a reading that you could make is that, the creature is a being, and you can read into him a lot of Mary's theory, Mary Shelley's own theories about the development of an individual human being, and is kind of sped up so that she can go through all the stages of development and explore them. But, there's also the possibility that the creature is a metaphor for the development of humanity more broadly, from kind of whatever kind of creation you want to understand us as having had, to kind of that slow understanding and feeling of the world around us, that discovery of fire, which again is a metaphor for knowledge, the kind of experimentation with the world around him to figure out that fire burns, and then the acquisition of language. I mean, you could read kind of a metaphor of how she understood human development into that if you were so inclined.
The things that he learns, not just fire he burns, but he mentioned, like he finds this hovel to take cover in, and he says that he's not going to go into the cottage. After my late dearly bought experience, I dared not enter it. And he lays down, he says, happy to have found a shelter. And then I saw the figure of a man at a distance, and I remembered too well my treatment the night before to trust myself in his power. One of the first things he's learned: fire's hot and it hurts, but it's also warm, and don't trust people.
Well, and I mean, again, so to look at this from an kind of like an evolutionary perspective, even though Shelley is obviously writing before Darwin, but that's how human beings learn to survive, is that, we learned to correlate, for example, that the rustling of the leaves means that there's a predator in the bushes and you need to run away. So that ability to find patterns, to find, causality, the relationship between cause and effect, that's a crucial part of human evolution that allowed us to survive and then evolve. And the creature is obviously developing that same capacity. He can correlate human being, person, to kind of almost like predator, and he needs to run away because this person is dangerous. He can relate that cause and effect. He can find that pattern.
He finds this hovel, and it's like dirt floor, and it's like not like they're pigs, they're near there, but they're not in there with him. But his comment is, it was indeed a paradise compared to the bleak forest. So paradise is a signified word there, for Paradise Lost, but and that idea that he is this new being who finds something. And I can't help but think that Mary Shelley is comparing the difference between this new being's life and the life of the new beings in Paradise Lost, where Adam and Eve are literally in a paradise. For the creature, his paradise is a hovel attached to a house, attached to a cottage that clearly is not going to be very comfortable. But he can't even sit all the way up. He says the roof is so low. So and we know large. He's nearly 8 feet. I think nearly 8 feet tall is how Victor describes him earlier.
Well, and one of the key ideas in Paradise Lost is that heaven is not necessarily a place, just like, being God is not a place on top of the throne, which is something that Satan fundamentally misunderstands, which is why, he attempts to replicate heaven and hell and build pandemonium, and says, well, if we build an equivalent, if we build something just as kind of fancy and majestic, then then hell will be like heaven. But it's not about kind of the nature of the place, the appearance of the material qualities of the place. It is about something else entirely. In Paradise Lost, heaven is about the presence of God and being in the presence of God. And here for the creature, it is about, it's something much simpler, which is kind of being sheltered from the animals and not being in danger from whatever human beings he might encounter who might scream or throw rocks at him.
Right. All righty. Let's take our mid-break now, and then we'll get into him meeting the DeLacys. We bring Sundays with Frankenstein to you all for free, as we did Sundays with Dracula last year. So if you'd like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so on our website. But why not become a member? Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, like the one we just had last week, where Dan Hodge and I talked about Frankenstein adaptations, films, Franken films. Thank you all for everybody that came to that. It was a nice turnout, and that was a program that was free, but it was for members only. And if you become a member, you get exclusive access to programs like that. You also get 10% off of any reading courses that we have. You get 50% off of any Rosenbach programs. And the basic membership level of the Rosenbach is called the Mary Shelley level. So you can enter into the Rosenbach, show your support for the Rosenbach by becoming a Mary Shelley member. What could be more perfect for you Franken readers to join at that level and help us bring the books and manuscripts in our collections to life. And I want to give a shout out to the new members who just joined the Rosenbach this week. People who joined at the Mary Shelley level were Caitlin in Philadelphia, Kathleen in Philadelphia, and Rochelle in Philadelphia. Thank you all. We had someone join at the Abigail Adams level, and that is Irene in Birmingham, Alabama. And someone joined at the Phyllis Wheatley level, and that was Justin in Springfield, PA. I know Justin. Thanks, Justin, for joining. He is probably watching. And we even had someone join at the Charlotte Bronte level, which is like a higher up level. That was really nice. And that was Thomas in Sewell, New Jersey. So if you guys are watching this who have just joined, thank you so much for your support. And to everyone who has joined the Rosenbach or given a donation, your support helps me make this show and helps the Rosenbach continue to create programs and care for our collection. So thank you very much. And now that you guys are members, you get 50% off of upcoming programs like David H. Gustin, the foundation professor at Arizona State University, where he directs the School for the Future of Innovation in Society within ASU's College of Global Futures. He's also one of the editors of this Frankenstein annotated for scientists, engineers, and creators of all kinds. And he's going to be giving a talk on Thursday, March 18th, that I'll present to you virtually. The talk is called Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, Victor Frankenstein, and the Creature in the Contemporary World. Professor Gustin will discuss the relevance of the author, the scientist, and the creature in the contemporary world, in which the relations among gender, politics, science, and ethics are as fraught as they have ever been. You can go to the Rosenbach website to sign up for that program. And of course, we have merchandise, everybody. We have t-shirts and glasses and stickers, and I would love it for you guys to buy that. And if you do, take a picture of yourself in your shirt or holding your glass and put it on social media. And I love to see that kind of stuff, especially in our Sundays with Frankenstein Facebook group. So you can do that too. But if you're going to order merch, remember, the only way to guarantee you getting a t-shirt or a glass is to order it by tomorrow. And then I can't guarantee how much of a back stock we'll have after that order goes through. So that's our mid-break. Back to the creature in paradise, in his hovel of a paradise here. He he looks through this small chink in there that looks into the room, and it's a little creepy, peeping Tomish, the way he's watching them all the time through this. But he has good motives. He's not being weird about it. He beheld a young creature, and he says that she was young. Oh no, actually he also sees her with a pail in her head passing before his hovel, and the girl was young. This is Agatha, we'll later learn. And she is young and has a gentle demeanor. She was meanly dressed, a coarse blue petticoat and a linen jacket being her only garb. Her hair was plaited but not adorned, and she looked patient and yet sad. And then he sees the young man, who is Felix, and Felix also, he notices, uttering a few sounds with an air of melancholy. So I find it interesting the things that he first notices about them, or in memory, the things that first come up, is that her condition with Agatha, that she's poor, and that she is patient and sad, but that gentle demeanor especially. And this harkens to things that something that Christine asked earlier. Did readers at the time question the creature's acknowledgement of emotions and values? Whether or not the readers did at the time, we certainly do. And I think, you know, Mary Shelley is calling attention to this kind of creature noticing the gentle demeanor. Like he has a natural affinity for gentility, for the kind of condition that raises people above animals, or the kind of the people who behave savagely and hate him. That he seems to naturally understand this quality about people. Where do you want to talk about this, Anastasia, or do you?
Well, I mean, so I think that's interesting because again, so he's kind of not a blank slate. I'm sorry, I'm covered in mist again. Okay, there we go. It's this, yeah, I apologize. If the sun would just go away, please, that would be that.
Kind of like a purple glow too. It looks actually really good.
Yeah. Purple is regal. But no, it's interesting because so the creature is clearly not a blank slate when he is born, created. And you know, I think we can put aside the idea that you know, there's a lot of discussion in the chat about neuroscience and neural pathways and how those would have already been formed in whatever brain Frankenstein used. Obviously, they would not have had those understandings of neuroscience when Mary Shelley was writing. So she's writing from the point of view of the kind of political and moral philosophy of the time. And it seems that the creature is not born as an entirely blank slate. It seems, if anything, that he is born in kind of what John Locke would say, or what Rousseau would say, which is that, you know, man is born good. Man is born with a predisposition to be a good person, to be gentle, to not be selfish. And then, you know, society corrupts him. And this is what the creature says to Frankenstein in an earlier chapter. You know, he quite literally says, I was born good, and then my suffering and my misery and the way that I was treated made me bad. But there's also the fact that, you know, he's recounting his experiences 2 years later, then filtered through, you know, 2 more recountings by other people. So he seems to have acquired a set of values and understandings, you know, the idea that Agatha is dressed poorly, you know, her garb is very poor, you know. How does she know that, or how does he know that, unless he's already acquired some sense of, you know, what it means to be dressed poorly, what it means to look gentle, what you know, how poverty correlates to class and therefore to society, to social systems. And then just a tiny bit later, I know we're about to get to this, the idea that when he looks in the pool and he sees himself and he says, oh, I'm so ugly. Well, you know, how does he know what is beautiful and what is ugly, unless he's born with kind of some innate sense of what is good and what is bad. And of course, in a lot of 18th, 19th century thought, beauty correlates to goodness. You know, beauty is a signifier of goodness, which of course is what Oscar Wilde then kind of plays with in The Picture of Dorian Gray, when Dorian has that kind of portrait that is reflecting all of his evils. It's that same idea that beauty is an external signifier of your internal moral state. So he seems to have all of these kind of moral conceptions, observations, ideas, frameworks that are kind of already in his mind from somewhere. And again, I think we can put aside the idea that they were there in the brain of whatever convict or criminal Victor Frankenstein kind of took the brain from.
That's how we wind up, you know, interpreting it and finding it. But it's also wonderful that this novel allows for that like we can read our contemporary views of, science and how things, happen internally or in our brains, we can actually read them into this novel because the novel doesn't contradict those readings, which is really fascinating. That she didn't try to go too far in explaining the science and how this is all occurring, which then enables us later to read it, and it can work in ways that we can figure out.
Absolutely. I mean, so this goes back to what
it's science fiction, right?
Yeah. So I talked about science fiction is the way that it's kind of this performance of scientific rigor where you use scientific terminology. You use what we would today call technobabble, and you use just enough of it to make the reader believe that what is happening is possible within kind of a modern, rational, scientific framework in the kind of world that we exist in with the same rules that we have. But she doesn't fill in all of the blanks of this is exactly how it happened. She uses kind of just enough performative language to make us believe that what is happening is scientific and rational. And that's one of the reasons that, text of science fiction can hold up, is the way that you can then fill in that blank. So, contemporary readers would probably have filled in that blank with, again, kind of Enlightenment philosophy about how human beings are born and how they develop. And today, now that we have neuroscience and psychology, we can fill in the blank with those conceptions. And the novel still holds up because, Mary Shelley left us this, sorry for the pun, but she left us this like almost blank slate to fill it in, while making it very clear that she's setting her novel within a rationalistic paradigm in a world in which, science and rationality and physical laws are what explain reality, rather than, things like magic or superstition.
Yeah. The creature then sees the old man, and he sees that he's sad too. The creature notices the sadness in people. He sees that they're together and they're kind of happy in their togetherness, but they also have a sadness about them, and he wants to learn what that is. But when he sees the old man playing, it's just described as an instrument, and we learn actually in the next chapter that it's actually a guitar, and he plays it, and he's playing for the daughter, and the creature says, "It was a lovely sight, even to me, poor wretch." I don't know if that's the first wretch in this. I think there's 5 wretches in these 2 chapters that we're doing today. It's clearly the number 1 word in this novel. But it was a lovely sight, even to me, poor wretch, who had never beheld aught beautiful before. And then this last part of that, he says he raised her, that Agatha kneels in front of him. And then he says he raised her and smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced in his 2 weeks of being alive, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food. And I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions. This overcome by a father and, giving comfort to his child. It's a subtle move by Mary Shelley in not having the creature have distinct memories of Victor rejecting him and fleeing from him. That the fact that she, again, another instance where she's pointing out that the creature knows this stuff, almost subconscious, like he recognizes this is the need of his life without her just spelling it out. Or even at this point, because he's telling Victor the story of just accusing Victor, of not giving him the same treatment. The reader gets to make that connection, that's what's going on here. The creature has been abandoned, and one of the things that brings him this overwhelming emotional response out of him is watching a connection with a parent and a child.
Yeah, and again, he seems to have a sense of beauty when he listens to the music and when he watches them, and just like ugliness again, where does his sense of the beautiful come from? I mean, you know, for example, Kant at this moment in time was writing about beauty as this kind of like rational but subjective judgment that we make about what is beautiful. But for the creature, it's not about judgment at all. It's not about reason. He seems to have this innate sense of what is beautiful, just like he has this innate sense of, you know, what is good and what is ugly, and all of these other things that come from somewhere.
Right at the end of this chapter, he says the youth, who is Felix, began not to play, but to utter sounds that were monotonous and neither resembling the harmony of the old man's instrument nor the songs of the birds. And then he says, I since found that he read aloud. This was the sound of reading aloud to him, that he has a book, and he's not, that it's in a sense, he's playing the book by, you know, reciting what's on the page. I like that image there, that metaphor that the creature kind of comes up with for it. It's just, it's not, the sounds are monotonous, not quite harmonious as the playing would be. The next chapter, one of the things he notices is that the, again, he mentions that I remember too well the treatment I had suffered the night before from the barbarous villagers, so he's not going to go out. He remains quietly in his hovel. And the old man, whom I soon perceived to be blind, that he seems to recognize this, that the old man can't see and other people have to, you know, act as his eyes in a way. I'd also love to see, you know what, I should make a super cut of all the old blind man and Frankenstein and creature scenes in all the Frankenstein movies. That would be cool to see. And I wonder if there's anything we can learn, like does it say something about an adaptation in the way they treat that, you know, encounter? I mean, they all just might be the same. I mean, some are funnier than others, like Young Frankenstein is hilarious with Gene Hackman. I mean, that is hands down one of the funniest scenes ever in a movie. But I wonder, do they all approach it in that same way? And that the old man is clearly like, there's something about him that sets him apart from everybody else, just as this happens in the creature. I mean, even with Felix and Agatha, as you know, as beautiful as they are, the creature notices there's something wrong with them, and we'll learn their story later. But here it's at least poverty, that they are separate from the rest of humans. They have a condition that kind of puts them apart from everyone else. And the father has, you know, is blind, and that is what sets him apart. And these are the people that the creature first becomes attached to.
Well, and also, I don't know if you will be getting into, probably you'll be getting into this next chapter.
Get into everything.
But, you know, the fact that the old man is blind, that means that he is the only being that cannot and will not judge the creature based on his horrible, ugly, deformed appearance and run
He'll
away
recognize
from everybody
right
else.
away, and that's why he wants to approach him.
Yeah, so the blind man is the one who can see and experience and judge the creature's interiority without being prejudiced by his appearance. And that will be, of course, really significant in the chapters to come.
He sees the affection, he sees the gentleness, the benevolent smiles, but he also sees that they're not entirely happy, and they would weep sometimes. And this, if such lovely creatures were miserable, it was less strange that I, an imperfect and solitary being, should be wretched. That, you know, that poignant observation by him that he understands his condition, and also can see how his condition can be bettered in a sense, and is trying to figure out why that they're sad. And the first thing he comes up with, he realizes that it's poverty. I discover one of the causes of uneasiness of the amiable family, it was poverty. And then he realizes right away, I've been stealing their food. I better stop. So he does. He stops taking their food, and then he starts giving them something, in that he notices Felix go out to cut wood every day. And so instead he goes out at night and gathers all this firewood and leaves that for them. so they will have so he can help the family and help them, you know, in a way that they'll be happy. And it's his first way of rewarding the family for their unknown generosity of providing him with this hovel to live in.
Well, and okay, so I think this might be a good place for me to go on a little rabbit hole about sensibility and sentimental culture in the 18th century.
Go for it.
Because, you know, we've just reached the point where, as you read, the creature is saying, you know, he's deeply affected by the suffering of these people. So, you know, he feels sympathy for them. And then, you know, he's also kind of reflecting on his own state. And you know, even just a little bit later, you know, he says, when they were unhappy, I felt depressed. He says explicitly, I sympathize in their joys. So what they feel, he feels. So sensibility was kind of this really significant category that arose in the, or that was really developed in the 18th century. And I don't mean sensibility in the kind of sense we use the word in today, which, you know, you're a sensible person, you do what needs to be done. But sensibility in the sense in which, you know, Jane Austen titled her novel Sense and Sensibility, those are opposites. So, you know, sensibility is broadly kind of the ability to feel, the ability to receive moral impressions, to be moved by what you see. And in
sensibility, it's Marianne. Marianne is a sister who is full of sensibility. She has this emotional reaction and connection to everything going on around her.
Yeah, so it's essentially, yeah, it's essentially the ability to engage with both your own and others' sentiments.
You said essentially, and I thought maybe there was a pun you were trying to throw out there, but you said
no. But so one of the kind of the reason that's important is that one of the big debates, Enlightenment debates in all of this kind of discourse around education and political philosophy is, can you found civil society based on sentiment? So can you basically found society based on beings who are introspective and engaged with their own emotions, but also engaged with the emotions of other human beings? Or do you instead need to use reason to kind of come up rationally with a moral system upon which you would structure society, which is what Kant would have argued. And so this was very much in a lot of discourses about education in the 18th century, you know, teaching young people how to feel, how to reflect on their own emotions, how to respond and kind of respond to the emotions of others as well. And this also is why you have so much discourse in the 18th century about the dangers of the novel. You know, you may have heard of this. People thought novels were bad because, you know, they made women do things that they shouldn't be doing when they read too many novels. It was really a lot more complex than that, because there was the idea that novels could teach you how to feel. Novels could give you practice feeling sympathy for other people that you could then bring into your life and be a good kind of moral citizen and member of society. And the reason novels could be dangerous, and you can see this in rhetoric of the period, is the idea that you might feel too much for fictional characters, and then you might exhaust your entire capacity for sympathy on fictional characters, and then have none left over for real human beings. So you have, for example, you know, kind of polemics in the period. Look at, I saw this woman the other day who was literally crying about this fictional character and weeping and hysterical while her own baby was hungry and screaming in her arms, and she was ignoring it. So the
Tsar's a young Werther. I mean, he's going to read the, you know, Goethe's, you know, Tsar's a Werther in the next chapter, or a couple chapters from now, and that's part of the there was like a panic about that novel, because people felt like there were people who were committing suicide, after reading this novel, because this is what happens at the end of the novel. Sorry, big spoiler. The novel's 300 years old. I'm going to give spoilers for it. And people, and that it's hard to know that if it actually really happened, that people did have that reaction to the novel, that they invested so much emotionally in that character that when he killed himself, that they would imitate themselves. But it is, I think, true to say that people were very much emotionally investing in that novel in that way, that was one of the novels that was teaching people about this idea of sensibility and how to express yourself for good or bad. And the creature will go through this too.
So The Sorrows of Young Werther is really interesting because it's what's called a Bildungsroman, so a novel of education. And, traditionally the novel of education is not just, the story of somebody growing up and learning things. It's the story of a human being becoming socialized and specifically going through an education of how to be a member of society. And so The Sorrows of Young Werther is kind of almost an anti-Bildungsroman because Werther feels too much. He's unable to temper his own emotions. He is unable to grow into kind of a rational being who is able to take his part in society. He, in fact, removes himself from society because he's not able to develop a proper self that feels, but that, feels the right amount and kind of feels within the boundaries of what is normal and what can be sustained. And so the reason I bring up sensibility and sentimental culture and civic society is because, again, so if you're thinking about, can sentiment be the basis, can sensibility be the basis of civil society? Like, can you base it on our capacity to feel and reflect on our own emotions and engage with the emotions of others? That's something that's so pertinent to Victor and the creature, who are polar opposites here. Victor, as we saw, has absolutely no capacity for self-reflection. He blames everybody but himself for his problems. He blames his father, he blames fate, he blames his teacher, everybody. He has no capacity to engage with the emotions of others. So, when Justine is on trial and falsely accused of murder, and Victor's just kind of like, I'm the most wretched person in this room, even though Justine is about to be wrongly executed for murder. He has, of course, no capacity to relate to and understand the interiority and the feelings of the creature. He's just, in general, very limited in his ability to, understand and relate to others' interiority. And he also fails to be moved by the sublimity of nature around him. If part of sensibility is the ability to receive moral impressions and be moved, Victor is always going on about how I saw these majestic mountains, but I was so miserable that they made me feel nothing.
Yeah.
And this is a complete contrast to the creature, who, as we see, does feel sympathy. He's deeply affected by the suffering of the de Lacys. He explicitly says, when they were unhappy, I was depressed. He uses the word sympathy. And then, of course, also he self-reflects. This entire narrative, this entire story that he tells to Victor is a narrative of self-reflection. He is constantly pondering his outcast state, his wretchedness. So we could almost, I think, see in this contrast between Victor and the creature, who both tell their narratives of their development in the world, their Bildung, their education, their kind of attempts to grow and become members of civil society. Victor, even though he has all the privileges of status and education and family, he's still he fails to be a proper member of society. He fails to feel and engage with other people. And then the creature, who is wretched and outcast from the very beginning, he has this capacity for sympathy. He has this capacity to understand the interiority of other beings. So in the way that he is created, just kind of before he receives any other shaping or molding, he is suited to being a member of society, and one who can relate to other beings, and you know, be a proper member of society. And so it's interesting to think about what Mary Shelley is implying with that, what she's kind of trying to say, or whether she's just posing a question and there's no answer to this, and the juxtaposition between the creature and Frankenstein is just kind of an open question, the answer to which we ourselves have to fill in.
Well, that he wants to help the DeLacy's as well, this kind of help relieve their suffering, that he's naturally inclined to help them. I mean, is that the question for me is Shelley kind of putting out there that the natural condition of humans is to help others, to not just experience the sensibility, but also the care and the compassion that we're not naturally selfish or destructive, that we have an instinct, as the creature seems to have, to help others around him.
Well, I mean, I think that's part of, you know, sensibility and sympathy, because if you understand other people as having an interiority that is like your own, if you understand them as having the same capacity for thought and suffering and pain and joy as yourself, I think the idea is that you will feel naturally compelled to help them, to aid them. And that is kind of how you have a society based on sentiment, is that others' feelings, others' interiority is as important as your own, and it moves you to action. And you know, that's why the creature wants to help the DeLacy's, because, you know, that's what you do as a good person in society. If other people are suffering, you feel sympathy and you help them.
We have a couple other things we definitely want to hit in this last half hour. And the first is acquisition of language. And that's what comes up next in this chapter. And we definitely want to make sure we get to talk about the creature seeing his reflection in the pool too, which is really a big part of this chapter today. Let's hit language, because this is a great this whole paragraph is hard not to go through the whole thing. By degrees, I made a discovery of still greater moment. I found that these people possessed a method of communicating their experience and feelings to one another by articulate sounds. I perceived that the words they spoke sometimes produced pleasure or pain, smiles or sadness, in the minds and countenances of the hearers. This was indeed a godlike science, and I ardently desired to become acquainted with it. The idea of language as a godlike science, and then he goes into these particulars of how he winds up learning. He's baffled at first. The pronunciation is difficult, but he couldn't figure out any clue to how to unravel the mystery. And then he discovered that the names that were given to some of the most familiar objects of discourse, that fire, milk, bread, wood, and then he learns the names of the cottagers. That he learns, father and sister, Agatha, Felix, brother, son, and then good and dearest and unhappy. He learns these kind of words of condition. I absolutely fascinating that Shelley kind of creates this moment of what it would be like to be aware of the acquisition of language through the creature. And is this, somebody mentions, Tammy had talked about the difference between nature versus nurture, which I think is a little different than this. So let me save that for a little bit. But Mary's also replying to or kind of infusing this text with ideas that have been going on for over 100 years now about how we learn to speak, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think there's so much there, because again, to return to what I was saying earlier, language is what sets us apart from the animals. Mm-hmm. He calls it a godlike science. And if you remember, for example, in Paradise, it is Adam who names the animals, so God creates the animals, but he says to Adam, you have the gift of language, you will be the one to name all the animals. And so, this is really interesting, because it's yet another indication, I think, once the creature recognizes what language is and starts learning it, that he is something akin to a human being. He is at the very least a person, because, you know, not only does he have this capacity for sympathy and sentiment and self-reflection, but he also has an understanding of language. Obviously, like many things in this novel, that has been rather complicated by contemporary science, because, you know, we understand not only that all animals communicate with each other, but even that plants and trees communicate with each other. We've been able to teach, you know, gorillas sign language, for example. So the idea of language as the purview of the purely human has today, and, you know, in our contemporary moment, been disrupted. But you know, when Shelley was writing, that would definitely, language would have been understood as something that was the purview of the human.
Are you fascinated by the fact that what's left out of this list of names? Father, sister, Agatha, Felix, brother, son. There's no daughter. And like, why did Mary like, I don't think she's consciously saying, like, I'm not going to include daughter. Like, that'll keep them wondering about my condition in life and my relationship with my father right now. But she does leave it out. The daughter is not in those terms.
I'm sure there have been multiple peer-reviewed papers published
That's
on
a
this.
paper.
I don't
paper
even need to
somebody
check
could write
to know.
here in school. There you go. but she has this relationship with her father, because as she's writing this, Godwin's not speaking to her. He's speaking to Percy. He's still trying to get money out of Percy. They're still exchanging letters. Percy has promised to give him money, and he hasn't followed through with that. But he's not speaking with his daughter, and his daughter will wind up dedicating the novel to him. They are, maybe he is speaking. No, I'm wrong. I said he's not speaking to Washington. He is actually, because when she first starts writing the novel in the summer, he's not speaking to her, but then she's married to Percy in December of that year, and then of 16, and then is writing it still in 1817, and Godwin accepts her back into his life, that he will, you know, that he's then speaking to his daughter after her and Percy get married. So, but it's still a fraught relationship that he had chosen to, you know, shun her at the moment, at you know, when she still needed him, obviously.
Well, and if we're gonna kind of psychoanalyze Mary Shelley a little bit, I think there's something to be said with the way that Mary dedicates this novel to her father, William Godwin, who she's on very strange terms with, and kind of comes to him like, here, I dedicated this novel for you. I grew up to be the daughter that you wanted and published like something great. Please accept me. Which is kind of what the creature does. He comes to Victor and says, you know, I'm your creation, please accept me. You know, I will not hurt you, my creator. You are my God and king, or my Lord and master. You know, he uses a phrase like that, you know, I come to you, please accept me. Which in both situations to me is heartbreaking.
And the Mary Shelley movie that I think is actually pretty good. The film, I can't remember the director who just made the Mary Shelley movie. That becomes the end of the movie, like the warm moment at the end of the movie, that like she's published this novel, and Godwin completely accepts her as his daughter and likes the fact that everybody knows, and he's like, he puts the book in the window and she sees him. She's like, hey, and he's like, looks at her like, hey, yeah, like it's a sitcom at the end. It's not, but it's that you're right. I think part of her drive, and she mentions this even a little bit in her 1831 introduction that we talked about this, that she needs to prove to these people, or she feels the burden of having to contribute as a literary artist, that she has that burden from her parents. And this...
also at the age of 18 years old, I mean, that's the age when you still really want to impress your parents, and that's the age at which you want to live up to their expectations. And I think it's kind of only in your 20s that your brain fully develops, you start to fully develop a sense of self, and you kind of figure out what you want in life. But when
it's a little hard to make that analogy, you know, for also true 200 years ago. I mean, the conditions of society and relationships and how we, you know, relate to each other, that by 18, it was rare. You're pretty well expected to be a fully functioning adult in a couple hundred years ago. And if you're of the poorer classes, it's even younger than that. You are expected to be a self-sufficient person, that you can work and contribute in ways that we don't expect people to now, that we've pushed that off into the 20s, into college, and even after. But people in the past, that was not pushed off. You had to learn all these lessons a lot earlier in your life. And of course, it would create a lot of pressure.
That's very true. But I do think, just kind of in terms of psychologically and in terms of having a sense of self, or, I think it's after your teenage years that you kind of start figuring out what is it that you want, what is it that is the core of your identity. That takes time for any human being, and also for the creature.
And for Mary, the sense that she comes from this tradition of these two, great minds and great writers, and now she's in a relationship and will be married to another great writer, and she seems to know all the great writers, or they all know her because she's the product of this family as well. But the acquisition of knowledge here, to head back to this, and the way the creature approaches it is kind of lines up solidly with the way people were thinking that language at the time was acquired by humans, and how we would have to do this. And the interesting thing about this novel is that we get it through the lens of someone who can already talk about it. It's kind of hard to remember what it was like when you were, an infant learning your first words. I mean, almost everyone can't, but the creature can, and convey this sense to us. So we get this sense of this, new being, and we get to know what the new being was thinking all along, even though it's in retrospect here. He, with the family, he's becoming more and more attached to them. And when they were happy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathized in their joys. And even for the first time, he uses they're my friends. And that's the first time we get that, my in there, from the creature, and he calls them my friends, that he's essentially become a member of the family without them knowing. Like, in his mind, he is a member of their family. He is part of their existence. And he thinks words and the acquisition of language will help him, meet them. He says, although I eagerly long to discover myself to the cottagers, I ought not to make the attempt until I had first become master of their language. But he recognizes that he's going to have to convince them that, like, I understand how I look and how horrifying it is, but hear me out, and that he will get to make his case to them. And then he goes off, and, well, the whole paragraph is, I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, like they're the Adam and Eve in the garden here, Felix and Agatha and the father, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions. But how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool. At first, I started back, unable to believe that it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas, I did not entirely know the fatal effects of this miserable deformity. Sees his reflection in the water, and this is his first reaction. He is horrified at his appearance.
Yeah, he's almost like an anti-Narcissus. If you know the myth of Narcissus, who looks at his own reflection in the water and falls in love with it and kind of wastes away staring at himself and admiring himself. That's where we get the term narcissism. The creature is the complete opposite. He looks at his reflection, and instead of falling in love with his own beauty, he is horrified by his own deformity.
And it's a key moment in Paradise Lost when Eve does this. And again, it's what is emphasized here is the difference between what Eve thinks when she looks in the water and sees herself and what the creature thinks. This is the quote from Paradise Lost. It's in book 4, around like line 458, something like that. I thither went with unexperienced thought. And Eve is narrating this. I thither went with unexperienced thought and laid me down on the green bank to look into the clear, smooth lake that to me seemed another sky. I like that image because she's looking at it and it's obvious you can see the reflection of the sky and the earth. So it's almost like another world there. She says, as I bent down to look, just opposite, a shape within the watery gleam appeared bending to look on me. I started back, it started back, but pleased I soon returned. The sense too that she's also learning, that she's figuring out the world. She's just been created. She has not met Adam yet. She has just been created. And these are her first, experiences in the world, just as we've seen the creature have his first experiences and how he learns from them. Pleased I soon returned. Pleased it returned, her reflection, as soon with answering looks of sympathy and love. That's what she sees when she sees her expression. She sees sympathy and love. There I had fixed mine eyes till now and pined with vain desire, had not a voice thus warned me, what thou seest, this is God, what there thou seest, fair creature, is thyself. With thee it came and goes, but follow me, and I will bring thee where no shadow stays, thy coming, and thy soft embraces, he whose image thou art, him who thou shalt enjoy, inseparably thine. So when Eve looks into the reflection, first of all, she recognizes that, hey, I'm hot, like, woo, like I am beautiful. And, this is very pleasing. And even when God says to her, that's, don't focus on that, because I'm going to bring you to someone who will embrace you and who will love you and who will be yours forever. I mean, this is the kind of thing that the creature is, he asks Victor for soon, and that he is kind of finding with this family. It's the communion with others. But when the creature looks in the pool, he just sees that he's a monster compared to these others. And
it's just, again, that infuriates me. So I mean, I get why that's in there, but that, I think that infuriates me, and I think maybe it's supposed to infuriate the reader, the idea that he looks, that he already from the beginning has this preconception that he is monstrous, and so it doesn't seem to even cross his mind that he can be anything but bad. It doesn't cross his mind that he can be good, even though what we're seeing from this entire chapter, what we're seeing as he, recounts the story, is that he is good. He's one of the kind of most good people that we have met throughout this narrative, along with, maybe Elizabeth. But he does not seem to even realize his own goodness, because he sees only the deformity and the monstrosity.
he has, Hamid said, I think the choice of the word deformity as the creature is describing himself to Victor is a condemnation of Victor. His reaction towards seeing himself as monster and judging himself in that way by his appearance is also what he's learned, right? I mean, he's learned that people will throw stones at him and shriek and faint and run from him. So this is just part of his, when he sees his reflection and compares it to the cottagers, even though he instinctively seems to have this idea of what beauty is, it's hard to know if he knows this immediately or if this is a reflection later, but this is how you're supposed to look. And this is how he looks, that is monstrous. And then he calls himself a monster is tragic. at this early in his life, weeks old, and he already believes that he's a monster. And I think it explains a lot. I think it will have a bearing on his, reaction to rejection later, that how quickly he turns and will murder innocent people. In that what he has learned so early on is that I am a monster. And so later he will behave like a monster because that is what he has learned that he is. And it's so tragic. So
it is. I mean, that scene, it's when he looks in the pool, I think it's really the scene where he recognizes his own otherness. It's, when he can put together that the de Lacys are beautiful and gentle, and I recognize that in them. And I must be unlike them if people are frightened and running from me. And so I am in some way other. And, there's someone in the chat that says, this book is very queer. And I think that that's very true. There's a lot of ways in which you can read otherness into this text, and a lot of ways in which you can read and interpret the creature's realization of his own otherness, his own, ostracization. Again, there's a lot of readings you can make, including a kind of biographical reading of Mary Shelley, and maybe the way that she might have felt othered or exiled or ostracized, both from choices that she had made, but also from aspects of her identity.
He, to finish up this chapter, time passes and he notices the passing of the seasons. Again, we get this more of this experiential, thing going on with this new creature as he notices the seasons moving along and how the sun changes and the weather changes. And then there's this passage today that I quoted at the start of the show today, where he's leaving wood for them and shoveling their walk. And this I cleared the path of the snow, and performs these things. And then he says, I afterwards found that these labors performed by an invisible hand greatly astonished them. And once or twice I heard them on these occasions utter the words good spirit and wonderful, which are in italics in the novel. But I did not understand the signification of these terms. I mean, that he's called a good spirit is just so, it's heartbreaking, because clearly we understand the condition that he's in and we know what's going to happen to him. But he has this moment, right, where that he gets to be the good spirit, however briefly. And
it's funny. The first time I read this novel, I was 19, which is how old Mary Shelley was when she wrote it, I think, or I was 18, and I was focused primarily on the intellectual aspects of the story. But this time when I'm rereading it, I'm so focused on kind of the emotional aspects, feeling sympathy for the creature, feeling heartbreak. So, clearly I've had my sentimental education between the age of 19 and now, and I've become, kind of a better suited member of society.
Now you're a good spirit.
In the framework, yes.
He again, he mentions here, I long to discover, why they're sad and inquisitive to know. I thought, foolish wretch, that it might be in my power to restore happiness to these deserving people. I looked upon them as superior beings who would be the arbiters of my future destiny. And this is where, that he's, just this fantasy life that he has in his mind of how he's going to approach them, and they're all going to be this happy family living there. It's very sad to read this. He mentions that she mentions this. He does this fable of the ass and the lapdog. And if anybody doesn't have that an annotated edition, that's a reference to an old fable where an ass sees the owners of this lapdog being affectionate to it. Like the dog is yipping around and jumping up on their lap and they're like, oh, this is great. So then the donkey tries it and they yell at it and beat it because donkeys aren't supposed to do that. And actually this fable, La Fontaine fable, was one of the fables that Godwin himself, Mary's father, had translated and into a book for children and sold in the shops. So she was very aware of this story. But this little fable speaks to what's going on in this, that the creature mentions it, that it is, the fable is about your condition in life, and you need to, and now the lesson of the fable can be, you should accept your condition in life and not go beyond it, or people will, put you back into your place. Like the donkey is not supposed to act like the lapdog, but it could also be a story that says that's wrong, that people should be praising the donkey for doing that, not, berating him, which is certainly how the creature would feel about that story. He fantasizes about meeting them, and then we get this final end paragraph where spring is coming in and the creature is just overjoyed at life, right? Read that end there. Read that last paragraph.
The last paragraph, the one that starts with the pleasant showers.
Yeah.
The pleasant showers and genial warmth of spring greatly altered the aspect of the earth. Men, who before this change seemed to have been hid in caves, dispersed themselves and were employed in various arts of cultivation. The birds sang in more cheerful notes, and the leaves began to bud forth on the trees. Happy, happy earth, fit habitation for gods, which, so short a time before, was bleak, damp, and unwholesome. My spirits were elevated by the enchanting appearance of nature. The past was blotted from my memory, the present was tranquil, and the future gilded by bright rays of hope and anticipation of joy.
This moment of like, that's as close as this book comes to like this moment of joy, happiness, right? It's unbelievably hopeful, and it's a spring moment. So it's spring. It's that idea that it would engender hope in him. But go ahead, you have a butt to that.
Yeah. Well, and that is all true. But I also think that it's very interesting to note that, earlier I was talking about how one of the aspects of sensibility is the ability to be moved, to receive impressions from the world around you. And we noticed that this is something that Victor is fundamentally lacking. He's kind of unable to appreciate the beauty of the world. He is unable to have that experience of the sublime when he looks at the mountains and the Bec de Glace and all of this beautiful and awe-inspiring majesty. And it just kind of fails to move him because well, he's so wrapped up in his own misery and his own problems, but also possibly because his attitude to the world is one of, controlling and conquering nature. He wanted to, follow nature to her hiding places and dominated. So he is unable to just kind of stay back and be, passive, be moved by nature, let nature kind of impress upon him, and therefore in a sense have power over him. Whereas the creature has this capacity for appreciating both the beautiful but also even the sublime, and and he allows his spirits to be elevated by nature. So it's this attitude of where he allows himself to receive kind of moral and kind of more moral impressions and just impressions in general from the nature around him without attempting to dominate it, to take the position of creator in relation to it. But he's happy to be a creature, yet another creature in relation to creation.
And the creature doesn't look to the more traditional places of where people were looking to experience the sublime, these kind of grand, majestic, terrifying things like mountains, or even just something like a waterfall, something really big that is supposed to awe you as well. The creature likes to look at nature and experience nature in these very simple, quiet ways. And
I think that's partly because
comfort.
I think that's partly because he's not going to be frightened by mountains in the same way that a human being would, because as we've seen, he can just kind of scale on it. It doesn't frighten him. It doesn't scare him because it's not dangerous to him the way that it is dangerous to a human being.
A moment, an end of a chapter here that we won't find like many moments that chapters end like this, with this, happy earth, bright rays of hope and anticipations of joy. That's not how it's going to turn out, people. Sorry if you haven't read.
Yeah, well, I've got plenty of bright rays of my own here, which, as you can see, they're
there you go.
Me,
there you
so.
Go. And it's cleared up. It's not all cloudy there now.
Oh, good. Yeah, I should have just done this. There we go. I look less cloudy now that we're at the end.
Well, and we hit right around the 2 hour mark, so it was good timing. Perfect. Today for these 2 chapters. Franken readers, thank all of you for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website, and if that's how you're watching it right now, thank you so much for watching. We have a Sundays with Frankenstein Facebook group where we continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. There's always interesting things on there. I'm always available to answer questions via email, which I have to do on Facebook group because Adam gave me a question about names in this that I forgot to hit today, that I will hit on our Facebook group. Next week's co-hosts will be our friends, the Ghoul Guides, Mary Going and Dr. Lauren Nixon. We all love them, and I can't wait to have them back on the show. The first edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is just one of the many gems of the Rosenbach's collections. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including our gallery gateways and exhibitions. And the Rosenbach's also open. You can sign up for time tickets for your visit. We allow one party at a time through the museum, so to keep you nice and safe. You can check out our new exhibition on 19th century Japanese sailor Manjiro. And please support the Rosenbach, which you can do by donation. If you're not already a member, I invite you to join. The basic membership level at the Rosenbach is called the Mary Shelley level. You can also support this show by buying Sundays with Frankenstein merchandise, t-shirts, glasses, stickers. And if you want to guarantee you get what you guarantee a t-shirt or glass, make sure you order by tomorrow. Anastasia, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Always great having you here. You sent me, Anastasia sent me an email last night saying like, I want to make sure I hit these. Did you like, I'm going to go down some rabbit holes. I was like, yeah, go down rabbit holes. Start talking about it.
I sent Ed a rather
I think you hit all that today, so that was good.
Yeah, I'm impressed. We got that all in the 2 hour mark.
It is annotating. That is the design. That's what we're supposed to be doing, going down rabbit holes talking about this. So thank you. Everyone join us next week on Sundays with Frankenstein for chapters 5 and 6 of volume 2 of this 1818 edition, when the creature continues to learn about the world through the DeLacy's and we meet Safie. So once again, we will be played out by Tucker Christine's Pleated Gazelle song, It's Alive. Farewell, good spirits, and remember, you have hope and the world before you. Bye-bye, everyone.
yourself can be